Alrighty guys, we're back with another deck profile. This one is pretty unique. We just got back from a tournament and I made top 8. Lost to a pretty rough matchup, but if I managed to get past it, my other 2 matches were going to be stellar matchups and I probably would have ended up winning the whole event. I ended up making this deck at 3 a.m. in the morning, the day of the tournament. Sadly, we couldn't go to Dallas, so we did this instead. Basically a League Cup level tournament, over 20 people, so there's a good chunk of people. This is in the expanded format still. And yeah, so let's get into a deck that I can guarantee y'all have never seen before. Everyone at the tournament was so shocked to see this list. But we started off with 4-4 VespiNoir line. Usually you'd imagine VespiNoir being a fast, heavy-hitting deck. Mainly using it for the B revenge attack, 20 and then 10 for each Pokemon in your discard pile. So you want to load up a bunch of Pokemon in the discard, and there's plenty of ways to do that. But this deck isn't quite what you would imagine. And seeing the other cards, the strategy makes a little more sense. But yeah, VespiNoir, since we run a lot of Pokemon in this deck, I think over half or over half the deck is Pokemon. B Revenge is going to be swinging for so much damage. I believe in one of my matches against Guardian, I swung for over 300 damage and just annihilated a Guardian. So the main star of the show is actually VespiNoir. We have a 3 Cosmic Eclipse Duskull, 2 Dusclops. I don't think the Dusclops really matters, but the real star is VespiNoir with the Sinister Hand ability. And if you haven't been playing that long, you might not recognize it. And it basically allows you to move your opponent's damage in any way you like. So we've got some really cool tricks here that will lead up damage for critical knockouts, allowing you to spread and knock out whatever you want on the field. And the card that really works well with this strategy is 4 Blow-Away Bomb Coughing, 3 Detention Gas Wheezing, and 1 Blow-Away Bomb Wheezing. So these Pokemon are going to allow us to spread damage around really fast, especially against big basic decks like Turbo Dark, which I went against round 1 and absolutely annihilated. There's really nothing they can do, even if they run Skyfield and try to bump out Pokemon, it still wasn't enough. You basically spread around damage as much as you can. In some decks, maybe like Night March or VespiNoir or Malamar, you can spread damage and then they'll all just be knocked out at the same time. But some matchups like Turbo Dark, you're going to want that VespiNoir to move the damage into the exact spots that you want it. Some other uses are maybe you don't have Guzma, or you have enough damage to knock out your opponent's bench Pokemon, and then you can B Revenge the active for game. So one example of this was in my last round where my opponent had an EX in the active, but they also benched a non-GX Pokemon. So I had been spreading a little bit of damage with Weezing, but all I did was just push the damage on. They thought they were safe, because I'm a Vespiquen. But all I did was push the damage away from the EX in the active to knock out the basic on the bench, and then I just be revenged for game. So out of nowhere, you can just pull these weird knockouts that your opponent really never thought of. And it's really cool too that even though Weezing and VespiNoir are some of the biggest star of the shows, their pre-evolutions are also really important to the strategy. Coughing, for example, if you use Roxie, you can spread 1 damage to all your opponent's Pokemon. So you can also use Weezing to do that. So we essentially have 5 pings with Roxie. But generally, you're going to get more mileage out of Weezing. Sometimes, though, in the Guardian matchup that I went against, Coughing and Weezing aren't going to do that much good, so you'd rather just use Roxie to essentially deal 20 more damage, and then you can get that key one-shot with Be Revenge. So that's what Coughing is for. But the Duskull I really wanted to talk about because of its amazing ability, Spirit-Born Evolution. And this card is really overlooked. The cost of the effect is pretty hefty, but we have ways to get around it. And in this deck, it actually helps out a lot being able to discard Pokemon we don't need. Once during your turn, you may discard the 3 cards from your hand. If you do, you can search your deck for Evolve and just easily, out of nowhere, pull out a Dusclops, and then next turn you can throw it into VespiNoir. So if you go first and you have enough cards, you can evolve on turn 1 and then get a turn 2 VespiNoir without rare candy. That's a huge thing about this deck, that we are running a stage 2 with no rare candy. But as you can see, we have a 4-4 stage 1 line, another stage 1 4-4 line, and then a stage 2 line. So this looks really clunky on the surface, but we have a lot of consistency cards that help this deck out so much. Like For Unknown, Farewell Letter. If you don't know, if it's on the bench, you can just trash it into the discard and you just draw a card. So it's so easy to blaze through your deck. Even though you're a stage 2, an Unknown boosts Be Revenge's damage. 2 very important cards in this list is Propagation Execute. Propagation Execute essentially breaks this deck. This is the card that makes this deck possible and essentially broken in a way. A lot of people that were around me said that this deck was so broken because of the things that you can do with this deck. Essentially having answers to everything and just insane interactions that I don't think Pokemon really intended. Double Prop Eggs gives you free Ultra Balls, which we run 4 of. It gives you free Spirit-Born Evolutions. So you can prop double eggs, have these count as 2 of the cards, and then just discard 1 more card. So you essentially pay 1 card to search your deck and evolve whenever. I think that's pretty insane, and a lot of people really didn't think of that. We have some more supporting Pokemon, but they're really used in emergencies. A Tapu Lele, a Shaman, and a Dedenne. That's pretty standard for a Vespiquen deck. And I think a Night March deck as well. You want to keep them low, but you need it in case you can't get started. It just helps you get started. And most of the time, I really didn't need them. It's kind of just a backup plan so that you don't dead draw and lose the game. Because this is a big stage 2, multiple stage 1 lines deck. But another spicy tech that's kind of disappeared is Espeon EX. Since this card hasn't been played in a while, its main use, a colorless Miraculous Shine, de-evolve each of your opponent's evolved Pokemon and put the highest stage into their hand. So if your opponent's playing an evolution deck like Zoroark, generally Vespiquen decks might not do as good against those types of decks. So what we do is we'll use one of our 3 Roxies to use one of Coughing's or Wheezing's moms to spread 20, and then we'd like to Splattering Sludge, and that should give you almost enough damage in one. That's like in one turn. So in a couple turns, you can quickly rack up enough damage, and then let's say Wheezing gets knocked out. You bring up Vespiquen because it's got free retreat, and then you drop Espeon, attach Miraculous Shine, and if their whole board is Zoroarks and Garbodors, mainly, I think the only Pokemon basic that they would keep on the bench is like Tapu Lele or Shaman. So if all the other cards are evolutions, then you'll de-evolve them and take like 5 prizes in one turn. That's what this kind of deck is kind of going for, is these big crazy setup turns that make the deck seem super broken with its interactions. I took 6 prizes multiple times in one whole turn. I would just be able to easily knock out everything and line up all the damage, and then usually Spattering Sludge for game, or move the damage to the bench Pokemon like I said, and then just knock out with Bee Revenge, and it's just over super fast. You'd think that this deck is like slow and clunky, but it really isn't. And now that's all the Pokemon we got. As I mentioned, these are the 3 Roxie that I run. The only other supporter I got is a Guzma. I figured Gust Effects could help, and they sort of did, getting that key Bee Revenge knockout, just in case your opponent feeds you something and you need to take that critical knockout with Bee Revenge that you don't have time to snipe. And if you don't have time to use Sinister Hand to get a knockout, then you'll definitely want to use Guzma to get Bee Revenge knockout. So now the rest of the deck is really items, like in terms of like raw consistency. I think another card that specifically breaks this deck, other than the 4 Ultra Ball being able to use it with Propagate, is 4 Battle Compressor. As this is a big clunky stage 2 deck, this lets you thin out so much. And there were honestly matchups where I would just throw away my Dusknoir lines, or throw away Tapu Lele, Dedenne, and Shaman. You can throw. Usually, my turn 1, I would like to get a Battle Compressor, trash Roxie and double Eggs, and then your 4 Versus Seekers become live now. And so you have 4 Versus Seeker with 3 Roxies and a Guzma. So you should be using a supporter every single turn. Roxies make this deck so incredibly busted with Execute. We have so many Pokemon that you can use. Coughing, Wheezing. Sadly, you can't use these 4 Pokemon, are EXs and GXs, but honestly, anything else is fair game. And there's very few situations where you lack a Pokemon to be able to use Roxies. Um, so our ace spec of the deck is computer search. You need as much consistency as possible. There's very few situations where you need to get something from the discard. I played the deck fine enough where I managed my resources, and there wasn't anything I wish I could get from the discard. So computer search is definitely the way we want to go. 2 choice band knocks your damage up just that little extra bit to hit key knockouts. It came in so clutch. Our stadium of choice is Shrine of Punishment, allowing us to get more spread on GXs and EXs. It's not that big of a deal if your opponent runs Chaotic Swell or easily pumps out stadiums. It's just a well-timed Shrine can give you enough math to win the game. So now, last but not least, our energy. We got 4 Heart Gold Soul Silver League DCE and 2 triple acceleration energy. That's all you need with the deck. There's really no need for special charge. Some of the cards, that special charge was one of the cards I originally thought of, but you know, DCE can be used for Bee Revenge, it can be used for Splattering Sludge, it can be used for Sky Return, it can be used for Miraculous Shine, and it can be used for Energy Drive. Nearly all your Pokemon can use it. And then in case you need to retreat with Wheezing, or you needed that little extra number of attacks, we got that triple acceleration energy. And because your Pokemon are generally going to get knocked out in one turn, triple acceleration essentially acts as another DCE. So you don't really lose anything there by it being discarded. So now I just want to talk about how I came up with the deck. The story, a lot of people were asking, like, they want to know how I came up with the deck. So the story goes that right after we finished recording our other videos, deck profiles, I had no idea what I wanted to run for this tournament because I never really thought about Expanded that much. Sort of like another video that I mentioned that's also coming up. But it's that same scenario where I didn't want to play anything like Turbo Dark or a Zorga, or not a Zoro fan. I've only done well with one Zoro deck, and that was Behem Zoroark that I made top 64 at with Richmond. But other than that, I've never really done that well with Zoroark. I just don't really like the card, and but as you can see, this is a pretty unique deck. So what exactly inspired it? Well, since I didn't know what I wanted to do, I wanted to just look at an article and copy and paste from there. I heard talk about VespiNoir checkmate, so I figured I would take a look at it, but it was under a paywall, and I didn't want to pay, so. And people talk about not copying lists. Hey, you shouldn't copy lists. So I didn't want to pay, so I decided to make my own list. So I said, all right, I'll make my own VespiNoir list. So we started with 4/4 VespiNoir, but then I think we were looking around in bulk, and somehow Dusknoir poked out, and I said, I want to do something with this. And I looked in our psychic type bulk and found Duskull, and then I originally, because Nag checkmate and Persian checkmate and Zoro checkmate, they generally have Nagana down here, but I didn't really have the room for that, And honestly, the deck is fine without it. It actually worked out better without Naganadel. Um, uh, but I saw Naganadel. We started with it was like the Vespiquen Naganadel checkmate, but then I saw Dusknoir, and I said to Nick, "How funny would it be if I drop Dusknoir, I move all the damage onto a tag team, drop Shrine of Punishment, and then Stinger GX to make myself go down to 3 prizes, and then Shrine knocks them out. So I would win the game in 1 turn." Um, and I sort of had that joke meme idea with this whole deck, being able to just win. Can we just win in 1 turn with Dusknoir? And I pulled it off multiple times. And well, we had to have a way to spread damage, so obviously, those sorts of decks like Roxie and Wheezing, so I started looking around there, but I found the Detention Gas Wheezing, and that card fell out of the meta because double colorless energy wasn't in standard anymore. But now in expanded, it fit the role perfectly. It's the Kronk meme. Oh yeah, it's all coming together. That's literally what happened with this deck. And then Unknown, Execute, it really just all came together. And before you know it, I had a rough list with some other techs. I didn't have the Espeon, I didn't have the Guzma, and I'm not sure if I had enough room for Shrine. I had a couple other things. Like I mentioned what was it? I mentioned something. Obviously Naganadel. I did Solitaire a couple games with Naganadel. I know that I had Target Whistle. I wanted to be cheeky with Target Whistle, but I quickly found out that it was a useless card and I never needed it. I'm glad I cut it. But I think it was Great Catcher. I really liked the idea of being able to prop double egg and get a free gust effect. And that's another cool combo and interaction that eggs allows in the expanded format. But I quickly ditched Great Catcher for Guzma, and I ditched. I was looking around, and I was thinking, like, a lot of players in our area tend to like evolution decks, like Zorogarb, and I wanted to have an easy out and answer to that deck. And the answer was Espeon, being able to spread and then devolve them and just take 5 prizes or 6 prizes in 1 turn. So as far as spicy techs go, I would say that Espeon is definitely the spicy tech for the deck, and maybe the Wheezing. But honestly, in terms of how the deck is structured, it's actually kind of linear and straightforward and streamlined. Because you have your 4/4 Vespiquen, 4/4 Wheezing, 4 Unknown, double eggs, a couple techs, being our GXs, like one of GXs, and then our Dusknoir line. And then you notice with our items, we have the 4 Ultra Ball, 4 Battle, 4 Versus Seeker. It's like the 4/4/4/4. And definitely with a Stage 2 deck, I needed to be as consistent as possible. Because one of the big things that players generally do wrong is that they want to have this spicy deck, and they want to run all these techs, and they want to be prepared for everything. But sometimes they go too far, and their deck just clunks on them. And if your deck clunks on you and you can't play the game, then you won't pull off your combo. So you need to be as consistent as possible, especially with these types of stage 2 decks, filled with half the deck being Pokemon. In terms of gameplay, my rounds, round 1 I went against Turbo Dark. I 2-0'd that really easily because of wheezing and detention gas, being able to spread stuff around, spread the damage, concentrate it on like shamans and double prize EXs. So then I take 4 prizes, and then I'll take the last attack with Bee Revenge. So you get easy prizes with Sinister Hand, and then just finish up with Bee Revenge. Since you're a single prizer deck, the best they can do is use Guzzlord. But even still, my opponent was pretty far behind because of the trade. And they would still have to knock out 5 whole Pokemon, excluding an EX or GX. And by the time they do that, you've quickly spread all this damage, and it's just too late. Even the fastest deck in the format couldn't handle how fast this deck went, which is kind of insane in my opinion. I didn't really expect that I would just easily beat the best deck in the format, as agreed by multiple people in the community, saying that Turbo Dark is the BDIF. I figured that they would just bulldoze through me. But I figured that I can outplay them. A big thing about this deck is sequencing and outplaying your opponent. And I probably should have said this in the beginning of the video, but this deck isn't an easy deck to play, and there's a lot of ways that it can go wrong. Like if you don't add up the damage right, if you don't sequence right, if you don't play it right, you can support or drought yourself, because I'm only going to play 3 Roxie and 4 Verse Seeker. So you need to play everything right. Some decks that lock you out, you might need to preemptively propagate. They play Silent Lab, since we only have 2 Shrine, you need to watch out for that. Garbatoxin. There's plenty of reasons why you need to preemptively propagate, so that you can ensure that you can use Roxie, because it's easy to mess up and then either not have Pokemon for Roxie or run out of Roxies real fast. You also need to watch for decking yourself out. You need to count how many cards you have in deck and the discard. You need to constantly count your resources. If you mess up with energy attachments, because you only attach once per turn, and you're only running 6 energy, if one of them's prized and 2 of them are triple accelerations, it's really dangerous if you mess up an energy attachment that you just don't have enough to win the game. So there's a lot of points where you can lose yourself the game. But if you play the deck perfectly, and I only lost against 1 person in the tournament, the deck it rewards skillful play a lot of the time. If you run it well, if you thin the deck and you sequence well, you will run hot with this stage 2 deck. Let's see, round 2, I believe I went against... I went against the Ultra Necrozma Garb of the room. It was the one Ultra Necrozma Garb. That was the one matchup that I didn't really want to think about. And the thing that really made it hard is you notice that we're not running Ranger and we're a single prizer deck. Well, of course, he decided to run ADP, so he goes ADP, turn 2. Obviously, I can't get a knockout turn 1. So the best I can do is knock out his ADP, which is possible. It is very possible to knock out tag teams on turn 2 with this deck. And later, my opponent was extremely surprised to see me hit over 300 easily with VespiNoir. And if your opponents aren't paying attention, you can literally go from 0 to 80 in an instant. Like, the damage can easily ramp up. Because you have your 4 unknowns, your eggs are going to go in the discard pile, your wheezing is going to go in the discard pile, your coughings and wheezing can go in the discard pile, your 4 EXs, that's like 200 damage right there. And then if you need to in certain matchups and big tag team matchups where you're not going to spread, then you just trash your VespiNoir line, and that's 70 damage right there. Along with blow-away bombs and shrines and choice bands. Even if you don't have enough to knock out with Be Revenge, sometimes that chip damage and damage modifiers can add up to be the knockout. So the problem with Ultra Garb, they're kind of the best stage, they're the best basic deck. And I have no hand disruption in this deck. I have no ranger. I have no field blower because there just isn't the room for it. This list is pretty tight, and I would say it's a near, like, maybe 59 card list. Like, it's pretty tight. I don't know what you can cut with it to make any matchups better. Like, everything has its reason. Everything works so well with the deck. So if you're going to ask me about substitutions, I really couldn't tell you much. I was debating over the Guzma slot, but you kind of need it. I would say it might honestly be a perfect 60. I can't tell you what I would change. So the Ultra Necrozma matchup is honestly going to be an auto loss, especially with ADP. Even though they're losing the turn, you need to knock them out with Be Revenge, but then they come in and knock you out and take 2 prizes. So even if you come back and knock them back out, then they knock you back out. And no matter what, you'll be taking 5 prizes, and they'll already taken all 6 of their prizes. Even still, if they can somehow, I know the deck can brick a lot, but the list that I went against didn't brick at all, sadly, for me. It bricked way more in Top Cut. But I still couldn't beat him. Ultra Necrozma might be the card that shuts out single prizers. If you noticed with some podcasts and discussion videos talking about Ultra Necrozma shutting out Night March and VespiNoir, because it's so much easier for them to trade with you, and they don't need Shamans and Dedenes. So they have a bunch of single prizers, and if you bench a single EX or GX, then they're just going to Guzma it up and win the prize trade. So that matchup was our worst matchup in the room, and of course I went against it. But if he didn't show up, or I didn't get paired against him, and he bricked in Swiss or something, then I most likely would have taken the whole tournament. All the matchups, there was a couple Lucario decks to counter out the Turbo Darks and Zorarks. This is an auto win against that deck. Turbo Dark is favored. Zorark, I would say, is 50-50, but the Espeon EX definitely makes the matchup really favorable. Um, what else? Egg can be frustrating. Depends. They're kind of slow, and you'd like to outrun them with Bee Revenge. So if you can do that, then you'll just tear right through them. But if they go first and like get a bunch of stuff set up, and then get item lock, and they can somehow get set up ahead of you, then they've got their AZs and stuff and healing. So it might be rough for you, but this deck should set up really fast, and you should be revenging or splattering, splunging on turn 2. I did it nearly every game. So what was next? Round 3 was Guardian. And it was funny because I asked my opponent, how do you feel about the matchup? And he said that he has no idea how I'm supposed to one-shot him. Generally, Vespiquen decks and Night March decks usually are known for not being able to hit big, bulky Pokemon. And Guardian, with the Fighting Fury Belt, has 300 HP. And with max potions, he believed that he'd be able to out-tank me. But I set up my damage in just the right way, where I was able to Guzma knockout a tag team and then Bee Revenge for game. I Bee Revenged him for over 300 damage. He did not see it coming. And he was pretty shocked. It was way overkill. So that matchup was pretty easy. Then round 4 was my buddy who was playing Egg Row, and I saw it best to, he offered the ID. I looked around to see what my other matchups were, and when I realized my matchups were really good and that the chances of me going against a good matchup next round were high, so I took the ID. And next round, I went against a fire deck. And, it's not much different from Turbo Dark. It's essentially a worse Turbo Dark. That's kind of the problem with Turbo decks is if you want to run a Turbo deck, the question you should be asking yourself is, well, why not run Turbo Dark? You want to run a fast-paced welder deck, but why not just run Turbo Dark instead? Or another one might be Pika Rom. Why not just run Turbo Dark? And that's why some of those decks aren't seeing as much play. But still, all of those types of Turbo decks, this deck just annihilates easily. But when I say annihilates easily, you do need to play the matchup good. It's not that the matchup itself is difficult. You are favored, but like I said, there's a degree of skill to this deck, and if you mess up, you can lose yourself the game. But if you play it perfectly, if you play this deck perfectly, you should be beating everything in the format with this deck. Maybe Shock, one of my my teammate Nick, he brought Shock Lock to this event, and that looked to be a rough matchup. But at least in the early game, I would be able to get some spreads with Roxie before he gets the Stoutland out. And if I can do that, then he won't be able to evolve his Pokemon. Because if you spread 20 on turn 1, manage to spread 20 again, that's 40 to all his guys, and then wheezing to tension gas with a splattering sludge should be enough to knock out a bunch of things. So the potential, just the sheer power of this deck, being able to one shot, being able to spread. This deck can literally do everything. Draw insane amount. Like I was hitting Roxie and drawing 6 every single turn. You can devolve Pokemon. You can spread damage. You can one shot. You can draw so many cards in one turn. You can use Battle Compressor to thin and search supporters. You have access to Shrine. You have access to Comp Search. You're a single energy attachment deck, and you're a non-GX deck. You have built-in consistency with Unknown. I really this. Honestly, is such an insane deck of how many options it just allows you to do. And part of the thing with this deck is you might have so much going on that you might get flustered. I'm like, what do I do? Do I be revenge? Do I intelligence gathering? Because I did that once. Do I splattering spludge? Do I need to sacrifice a wheezing? One thing I did against the Turbo Dark, since they went first and they're so fast, and it was interesting too that even though I'm a stage 1 and stage 2 deck, I went second a lot of the times and I still won. But if you notice you're falling behind and might get daunt, one trick you can use is propagate egg and then put it on the bench and then sacrifice it. Losing an egg, letting your egg get knocked out, is much better than losing a coughing that wants to be a wheezing, or a Dusclops that's about to be a VespiNoir, or when you need to get your VespiQuinn set up. One of the things that you'll notice that in this deck is that there's no rescue stretcher. You do not need to recover Pokemon. And we are running a thin line of a stage 2. So you do need to be aware of that. There's just so much that can go wrong if you don't know what you're doing with the deck. But like I said, if it's in the hands of a really good player and essentially a computer, and you play perfectly, it seems nearly unstoppable. Thoughts going forward. I forgot to mention, I believe I did mention it earlier, but how I lost my top 8 was against my round 2 opponent, and yeah, that didn't go so well. That's the one matchup I was worried about. The second matchup I worried about was Shocklock, and then the third matchup I worried about was Alolan Executor, and that was only because of the early item lock. But when you hit a certain point, it really doesn't matter. And we're only running 11 items. So it's kind of weird. You're only running 11 items, and when you hit a point, it really doesn't matter that you're item locked. And the Burning Shadows plume doesn't affect you at all. And Alolan Executor, well, if they throw that down, well, I'm just going to be revenge for a one shot, and then they just lose the prize trade. They might be running the Giant Bloom, Vileplume GX, but that's still be revenge one shot, win the prize trade. Other decks that showed up in our area was Night March. This deck auto wins that with the Wheezing. Wheezing is just so incredible in the spread. It just shuts down so many decks. There was a Reshek player around But if I went against him, that would be an auto win. Very favorable price trade. But other than that, in terms of matchups, I can't really think of what else you'd want to explore. So, in conclusion, this deck looking forward, in terms of Sword and Shield, the Pokemon V are still affected by wheezing. And of course, you don't get the Shrine and the Choice Band, which sucks a lot. Wheezing definitely still affects it. And you can be revenge still for a favorable price trade. And in Sword and Shield, I bring it up, like going forward thoughts, because there are still expanded tournaments coming up, and it seems that there might be more expanded tournaments than last year. So I definitely want to talk about this going forward, as this is a strong competitor going into the format, that really should be reckoned with and looked at. I don't think there's any notable cards from Sword and Shield that change this deck at all. I cannot think of anything off the top of my head. I guess at most would be Sableye, but that would be an entirely different deck. That, come to think of it, that it's actually an idea that I might try later. So I ended up leaking my own ideas, but we tend to do that a lot. We want to give y'all the best information, and I definitely like showing creative lists in the community. I like to believe that I have the opposite stance of hiding lists. I like to see people's reactions to crazy lists, but then afterwards, I like seeing people trying to figure it out. I like seeing people try to guess, and I want to promote more creative deck building in general, and I hope that, especially because I couldn't go to Dallas, and I'm probably not going to go to Collinsville, and I'm probably not, going to go, I just don't have that many opportunities to go, especially because I'm in college and school is kind of busy. So I won't get the chance to bring this deck to a regionals, but I did get to play it at our locals, and I did very well with it. And looking at the matchups, could have easily taken the whole tournament just in matchups in Theorymon, just taking the whole tournament, and I can definitely see this potentially winning a regionals. People were murmuring about VespiNoir checkmate. I did not look at any lists at all. I have no idea what's in that list other than VespiNoir, Roxie, and Naganadel. I just assumed that the strategy was similar to this, being use your executes to abuse Roxie, get a bunch of tech Pokemon in the discard, and use Be Revenge. That's my best guess at the deck, but this recording is while Dallas is going on, and I haven't seen the day 2. I don't think PokeStats has put out the day 2 decks. So I don't know how well VespiNoir is doing at Dallas, but this in my opinion, could be a contender for best deck. And honestly, thinking about the matchups, and if you're a perfect player, I think this could be a contender for best deck in the format. The sheer options, raw damage output, and being able to blaze through your deck. And at this point, I kind of have nothing else to say. I did want to point out, just wanted to wrap up with the overall conclusions of going into the future. So that's it from me. That's all I've got to say. If you've got anything to say about the deck, you think it's cool, you want to say something about the deck, do you have something similar to the deck? Throw it down below in the comments. You can also catch us at Facebook or Twitter, End-to-One-for-Game. You know where to catch us. But that's it from me. Ariados. Goodbye.